What Michael English confirmed in a recent conversation has stayed with people long after they heard it, not because of the words alone, but because of the weight sitting underneath them, the pauses, the way a man who has spent his whole life singing about peace and hope looked like someone fighting hard to hold on to both. People who have followed Michael's ministry for 30+ years know this is not someone who opens up easily. And through the most public and painful seasons any gospel artist has faced, he kept the hardest things close. The music carried what he couldn't say. God carried the rest. But something shifted, and those closest to him say it has changed the texture of every conversation, every prayer, every morning in their home. For the first time, Michael English has started speaking openly about what his family is walking through, because the people who love his music deserve to know, and because staying quiet isn't something this family can do anymore. 10 minutes into this video, the full weight of what has been confirmed will be clear to you. The reason the gospel community has been praying quietly, and the reason people close to Michael have been choosing their words so carefully, will all make sense. Stay with us, because what this family is now carrying puts every song Michael has ever recorded in a completely different light. For anyone coming to Michael English's story fresh, it's worth slowing down here, because the full meaning of this moment only lands when you understand who this man actually is, not just as a performer, but as someone who has been shaped by fire more than once. Born in Lexington, North Carolina in 1962, Michael grew up as a minister's son, in a home where gospel music wasn't a Sunday tradition, but the actual language of daily life. Singing alongside his brothers from an early age, music became the way Michael understood God, and that was never about building a career. That was a calling, and it showed. Joining the Gaither Vocal Band in 1990 launched one of the most celebrated runs in Southern gospel history, and the tenor voice that came out of that young man from North Carolina stopped seasoned musicians cold. Bill Gaither, who was sat across from more gifted voices than perhaps anyone alive in this genre, she recognized early that Michael possessed something that couldn't be manufactured, a quality that didn't just deliver a song, but filled a room and reached something deeper in the people listening. In Christ Alone, recorded during those early homecoming years, remains among the most treasured moments in the entire Gaither catalog, and the reason isn't technical. When Michael sang it, there was no gap between the lyric and the man behind it. People watching those homecoming videos in living rooms and church halls and nursing home common areas across the country didn't experience a performance. They experienced testimony from someone who believed every word completely. For millions of fans who came up watching those videos, Michael English wasn't simply a singer they admired. His voice was sewn into the sacred moments of their lives, a Sunday morning that changed something, a hospital room where hope was running low, a graveside service where a hymn was the only thing holding a family upright. And that is exactly why what this family faces now carries the weight it does, because when someone you trusted with the music of your faith walks into the valley, you don't stay behind. Now, people who have followed Michael's journey understand something that newcomers to his story might not, which is that this is a man who has already survived what would have finished most people. On the public collapse of his career in 1994, the years of personal difficulty that followed, the long and painful road back to the platform he was made for, all of it played out in front of the gospel world, and all of it eventually became part of a restoration story that this community received with a degree of grace that is genuinely rare. By the early 2000s, Michael had come back, and the return carried none of the qualities of a manufactured comeback. No campaign, no PR strategy. When what people witnessed was a man who had gone all the way to the bottom and found God waiting there, and the voice that emerged from that experience hadn't diminished. It had gone deeper. Gratitude had replaced effortless confidence. The sorrow had been processed into something that the only honest word for is holy. Remarriage came. Rebuilding followed. Michael and his wife Megan settled into a life quieter than his peak stardom years, but no less grounded. And people who know them describe a home built on real faith, a marriage that became a true partnership, a daily life that looked like the songs Michael had been singing his whole career. That is the before picture, and that is what was standing when the news arrived. The news came the way it tends to. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of appointments and tests and careful conversations with doctors that begin taking a shape you recognize before anyone gives it a name. Something was wrong with Megan, and it was serious, and what Michael said next, alongside what his wife confirmed separately, is the part of this story the gospel media has almost entirely left alone until now. A particular kind of strength only surfaces when a person has no remaining choice but to be strong, and Michael English has stood in that strength before. But people close to him will tell you there is a real difference between carrying your own weight and watching the person you love most carry theirs. And that difference is what the months leading up to Michael's recent public acknowledgement were made of. Priorities shifted inside that household. Schedules cleared. And the kinds of conversations that happen before sunrise, when the house is still and two people are reaching for words that don't come easily, became the texture of daily life. What has since been confirmed is that Megan English received a diagnosis requiring immediate and serious medical attention, the kind that doesn't allow life to continue on its previous course. People close to the family described the weeks after that news arrived as a season of deep reliance on faith and community, say a period when songs Michael had sung for decades stopped being lyrics and started functioning as lifelines. Speaking about that period, Michael used language that anyone who has sat beside serious illness in their own family will recognize immediately. The strangeness of still holding on to what you believe while the full weight of fear sits on your chest at the same time. Praying with a kind of desperation and raw sincerity that he hadn't brought to prayer in years, not because his faith had grown thin, but because certain moments strip away every comfortable layer between a person and God and leave nothing but need. What Megan confirmed separately, in her own voice, took its own kind of courage to say out loud. The initial disbelief, the sense that a diagnosis like this belongs in someone else's story. The experience of reaching back for scripture, memorized in easier seasons, and finding those words had been planted precisely for this moment. And Michael himself, who hasn't tried to minimize what she's facing or rush her through her fear, but has sat inside it with her and sung when singing was the only thing left to do. And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody close to this family anticipated. Michael English didn't retreat further into privacy. No carefully worded statement moved through a publicist's hands. He sat down and he spoke, plainly and personally, in a way that left nothing performed in the room. The diagnosis he described left no ambiguity about the severity of what Megan is facing. This is not a minor chapter in their story. Ongoing treatment, ongoing uncertainty, a road that is neither short nor predictable, walk together with the same God who carried them through every previous impossibility. During one of those conversations, Michael was asked directly whether anger had been part of his response, and whether any part of him looked back at everything this family had already carried and felt. The ledger was simply unbalanced. His answer is the kind that only comes after genuinely sitting with the alternative. Anger was present, yes, and there were real moments of it, but anger and faith, Michael said, aren't opposites. The Psalms are full of men crying out to God from places of raw, unfiltered pain, not because faith abandoned them, but because their faith was strong enough to hold that level of honesty. What he knows about God, Michael said, didn't change because of what he doesn't know about the future, and he said it the way a person says something earned, through actual darkness, not the way someone delivers a line because it's expected in a Christian interview. The gospel community heard that and felt it. And the response from fans who have been with Michael since the earliest homecoming days reflected exactly what you'd expect from people who love deeply and pray with specificity. Messages came in from women walking their own diagnoses, men who had spent hours in waiting rooms beside their wives, adult children of parents who had faced the same impossible calendar of treatments and prayers and small, hard mercies. They recognized themselves in what Michael and Megan described, and they responded with everything they had. Bill Gaither, who has never been someone given to sentiment for its own sake, made his position clear to those in his circle. The relationship between Bill and Michael is one of the most layered in all of gospel music, a connection that survived Michael's darkest season and came through it with more genuine depth than it carried going in. Bill's response to this news has been, by every account, from people who were present, exactly what you'd expect from someone who has always understood that the homecoming family isn't a brand or a concert property. It is a real family, with everything that word actually means. David Phelps, who shared some of the most memorable homecoming moments with Michael through the 1990s, has spoken in recent months about the gospel community's responsibility to surround artists and their families when difficulty arrives. People who know David well understand his words are rarely abstract. When he talks about showing up for one another, he's drawing from real conviction, not talking points. Guy Penrod, whose own path has included serious personal trials, has stayed close to Michael through this and offered the kind of support that doesn't announce itself, but simply stays present. For those who have tracked Michael English's journey across the years, through the homecoming era's heights, through the hardest public chapter of his career, through the quiet and genuine rebuilding that followed, this moment carries a specific kind of meaning that goes beyond concern for a favorite artist. Michael English isn't simply a voice people admire. He is a story they have invested in over a long stretch of time, and the stories that hold people longest are the ones that don't resolve cleanly, the ones that ask something of witnesses, that require sitting with uncertainty alongside someone they care about. What this situation reveals about Michael and Megan isn't fragility. Looked at straight, it confirms a faith that isn't decorative, isn't stored away for comfortable seasons, but is actively working right now in the hardest conditions it has ever faced, doing exactly what it was always meant to do. Gospel music has always carried something that the broader culture tends to rediscover only during crisis. Songs matter most when everything else goes sideways. When the stable things start shifting. Either the hymns absorbed in childhood and the scripture memorized during easier years become load-bearing in ways that weren't visible before. Michael English has been placing those songs into people's hearts and memories for most of his life, and now, in a season when he needs them back, they are returning, from the fans who learned them because of him, from the community gathered around this family, from the voice still inside him, even when everything else feels uncertain. People who have followed Michael since the early homecoming days know exactly what it means to say, this family deserves every prayer and every word of genuine encouragement this community can offer, because this is the moment those connections were built for. What is your prayer for Michael and Megan right now? Leave it below, because this community has always known how to gather around its own. There is one more piece of this story that most people haven't connected yet. And it matters not for the drama it adds, but for the depth. Anyone who has traced the full arc of Michael English's relationship with Bill Gaither knows it was tested in ways that would have permanently ended a lesser connection. When Michael stepped away from the Gaither Vocal Band in 1994, under circumstances painful for everyone involved, people across the gospel world concluded the relationship was finished, that the distance would harden, and that Michael would become a name discussed only in the past tense. None of that happened, and what actually unfolded is one of the quieter miracles running through the entire homecoming story. Bill Gaither didn't give up on Michael English. No public condemnation followed, and no quiet door closing either. Bill waited. He prayed. And when Michael began his long walk back, Bill extended a genuine hand, not because reunion made a good story or served any business interest, but because his theology takes restoration seriously in a way that goes beyond doctrine. His conviction is that no one is too far gone, and that the story God is writing about a person is rarely the one the world has decided to tell. Michael has spoken about what that meant during the worst of it, about what it does to a person to be at the bottom of their own failure and discover that someone whose opinion genuinely matters to them hasn't pulled their regard away. That kind of grace, arriving through an actual person rather than a principle, tends to become one of the most important things in a life. And so when Bill and his circle are described as surrounding Michael now during this new difficulty, that isn't new behavior. It is the continuation of something that has been true for 30 years. Mark Lowry, who has known Michael English as long and as closely as almost anyone in this world, carries a friendship with him that requires no announcement. People who know Mark understand that underneath the humor and the performance lives a man of real pastoral depth, and his presence in Michael's life through difficult seasons has been steady and real. Linda Randall, whose own path into the homecoming world came from a completely different direction, and whose voice became one of its most beloved, has spoken repeatedly about the gospel community's obligation to remain a community when the easy moments are over. Her words on that subject carry weight precisely because of how quietly she offers them. What the Gaither world looks like at its best is exactly this. Not a concert series, not a catalog, but a real community of people whose lives are woven around the same faith and who show up for one another across decades, regardless of what the season holds. What comes next for Michael English and his family is something the gospel community will watch closely, not as spectators, but as people with genuine stakes in the outcome. The road ahead for Megan remains uncertain in ways that anyone who has walked a similar path will recognize. Medical situations like this one unfold on their own timeline, and the most honest thing anyone can say is that tomorrow sits in God's hands in a way that is more literal than it usually feels. Treatment continues, prayer continues, music continues in some form, because for Michael English, music and faith have never been separate things. And faith doesn't come with weather conditions. A question this situation leaves open is worth sitting with rather than moving past quickly. What do we do with the stories of people whose faith we have leaned on, when those same people are standing inside something that faith doesn't exempt them from? The gospel has never promised exemption. Presence, yes. The assurance that the valley isn't the final chapter, yes. But the valley itself has never been guaranteed to skip anyone. And Michael English has always known that. The songs he has given people are not the songs of a man who has been sheltered from suffering. They are the songs of a man who looked suffering in the face and chose to sing anyway, and that may be the most important thing his voice has ever carried, more than the technical gifts, more than the breath control, more than the way a held note can bring a room to silence. The decision, made in full knowledge of what life brings, to keep going. Whatever comes next, the people who have followed this ministry across decades know one thing with certainty. Michael English's story is not finished. The voice that found grace in the lowest places it has ever been will find it here too. And those who love what he has given to gospel music believe that and are praying for it. If this story reached something in you today, if it brought someone you love to mind, someone walking through something hard, or if it stirred a faith that needed stirring, the next video in this series will speak to you as well. Another beloved member of the Gaither family recently broke a long public silence, and what came out of that conversation is every bit as unexpected and every bit as full of grace as what has been shared here today.